there were about 385,000 people who voted in the Republican primary that year.
Yep.
That is 10% of South Carolinians who control 100% of South Carolina politics. And now this effort is, I guess they want to make sure it's down to 7%. Like, why are we trying to disenfranchise people and make it the smaller and smaller and smaller slice of South Carolinians control what happens in Columbia? I don't understand it.
Today's our first second helping back after our winter break. This is season 3. And I wanted to start with, I think, one of the smartest women in our state, Spencer Wetmore. Welcome back. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
I mean, well, first and foremost, you have some kind of big deal news.
I do. So I just announced I am not going to seek re-election. It was a very difficult decision, but obviously, things are hard up there and take a lot of time away from my family. My youngest daughter is 10, and just not being able to take her to sports games and practices and not being able to be there, or alternatively, running back up and down I-26 trying to be there.
Yeah.
The typical sort of working mom problem, but just amplified times 1,000 because it was 2 hours away.
Well, I mean, I think we all need to be grateful for someone that jumped off the cliff and decided to jump into politics when you have little kids, you have things that are really important, and you chose the state as an important piece of your family structure, which is
a
lot of something. It's a lot that most people aren't willing to give. So for that, I think everyone in the state should be eternally grateful.
Thank you. We'll see how much they actually like having me around. I mean, look, it was 3 when I first started doing politics.
Oh.
So we'll see how it goes.
Well, maybe that means in a few years when she's 16, you can run for governor.
Sure, we'll see.
I'm going to stay on you. I've got you on speed text. Okay, so we want to talk about legislation today because holy moly, there are some things that came out last week with what's coming. And I think that a lot of times there are bills that get a lot of attention, but there's one that is really fascinating and really important for us to pay attention to that I kind of want to start with. Yeah. And I guess as we look at sort of how the parties talk about freedom and patriotism and all of these things, that when you use certain words, each party perspective has a different meaning of what those words are. And it's come down to like our basic fundamental understanding of what we as citizens and we as voters should rely on and should expect. And so this bill that I believe there's been this type of bill in floating around for many years, but it basically is about our fundamental rights and how we vote. And as we know, let's start with this. We in South Carolina, we know that our elections are supposed to be one person, one vote, and your vote is supposed to count equally as everyone else's.
Yes.
But if you back up before you get into the general election, we have these things called primaries. Yeah. And the primary is where people in the same party decide whether or not they're going to run. So let's say you have 5 people that all decide they want to run for the same seat. That means they're running against each other in the same primary. Yeah. And so the way that then we choose that is we go and we vote in the primary. And South Carolina right now has what's called open primaries. So you don't have to be registered for a party. You can vote in the Republican primary or the Democrat primary. And I do have a question.
Yes.
Why why wouldn't a party like the Forward Party do a primary? Because they don't have they just have one candidate running in each district, or is it just that like it costs money because the actual party pays for the primary?
Yeah, I think a combination of those things. Until you start having reliably more than one candidate running, it's probably not worth asking the state to do a primary for you. I
Mhm.
mean, I would imagine the other reason is it was really important what you said earlier. Yes, it's considered to be an open primary in South Carolina, but it's four, right? You
Right.
cannot come in and vote in two primaries,
Both.
right?
Right. Right.
And I would imagine that there are a lot of voters out there that aren't prepared to commit to, say, the Forward primary party for the entire ballot, right? They might
Mm.
have one candidate that they like, but then maybe they want to vote on the Republican primary for their choice of governor or whatever that is. So I think that's important for the debate in general to talk about the fact that it's four, right?
Yeah.
You there's this idea that there are all these crossover voting. I mean, I think let's start with the fact that you go in, you vote for in one primary
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
1 year, and then you are prohibited from voting if there's a runoff in the other primary. You're prohibited from voting in that. So
Yep.
it's not a complete. Some states actually allow you to go in, and it's sometimes called like a jungle primary, where you can pick and choose candidates from different sides. We at least have two separate things.
Well,
Yeah.
but that also, I mean, the whole premise of a primary sort of takes away a lot of the power of the voter because you're being forced to vote in one or the other, right?
Right.
So if
Right.
you are an independent and you want
Mhm.
to vote for the Republican governor on that primary, but you also want to vote in the Democrat Senate race,
Yeah.
you don't really have that option. And so you're
Right.
already forced into these purity
That's right.
tests
That's
of
right.
which of aligning yourself, but closing the primary
Yeah.
would reduce it even more, and that's what this bill is about, right?
Right. That's
It
right.
is about
Yeah.
them saying you have to choose. We are forcing you as a voter to say
Mhm.
you are either a Republican or Democrat. You'd have to register as one or the
Yeah.
other.
That's right. That's right. And there are two different bills, and they're a little bit different from one another, but essentially you're exactly right. You would have to choose, you'd have to register. If you wanted to make a change, both bills have a slightly different process by which you would have to change your registration
Right.
way in advance of the election.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
And
yeah.
so that limits what we can do,
That's right.
and we already have straight party ticket voting, which
Mhm.
we're one of only a handful of states that has that. And
Yeah.
so what they said is, oh, we're going to make it easier for you to vote. But it
Mhm.
really, that also eliminates our number one job as
Right.
voters, which
Yeah,
is to research
exactly.
the candidates, know who you're voting for, know what you're voting for. Like,
Yeah.
if you give people the option to be lazy, they'll take it, right? I mean,
Fair enough. But yeah, I mean, it's true. We already have all these ways in which partisan politics affect every part of our lives because partisan politics inform in every way who gets elected.
yeah. So what is the benefit? Like, if we know what we think about this, what would somebody who's pro this bill say?
Well, I can tell you because I've gotten quite a few phone calls over the weekend.
Oh, good.
um, but essentially, the biggest scare tactic that is being put out by the South Carolina GOP, the party, is that huge numbers of Democrats are crossing over and voting in Republican primaries. And of course, there's no data to support that. There's no
Right.
indication of that. And in fact, when you look at the numbers of Republican primary voters and Democratic primary voters, it's roughly proportionate to the numbers of people who vote in elections, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the idea that there's some conspiracy out there, it's wild, right? And this idea that it's party insiders trying to protect their people by
Yeah.
encouraging some huge number of Democrats to cross over. There's no data to bear it out. It appears to be a very anecdotal conspiracy. One of the bills actually goes so far as to prohibit somebody from running as a candidate who has not voted in that party's last three primaries,
Wow.
which is wild for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people that called me this weekend felt like it was just an attempt to keep David Pascoe out of the AG's race.
He's written a very strongly worded letter in the Fitz News
Yeah,
this week. Yes.
it's wild. But good for him for speaking out. But yeah, I also wonder, for example, Harriet Holman, who's been in the State House with us now for a year, she would be very honest with you about the fact that she was formerly a Democrat in Dorchester County, and that when she ran as a Republican, the Republican caucus touted her election and talked about how wonderful it was to have her as a member. And now they would prohibit her if the election were held if this bill passed. She wouldn't have been allowed to do that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I just think that this is it's furthering us. It's getting us further and further away from being a independent voter who makes decisions based on the candidate. It's forcing us to have this purity test of party, and none of us are just these one-sided people. We all have different views and opinions, and we already see it in politics where the parties negotiate backdoor to get people on their team to vote for things that they may not want to vote for in order to get something else. And this now just really is taking us backwards. It's giving us less freedoms.
Right. Well, and it goes back to something that you and I have talked about a number of times on this podcast and outside the podcast, this idea that gerrymandering really limits. I mean, I did the math over the weekend, and we have, on average, let's call it, I looked at using 2024 as an example.
Yep.
There were about 385,000 people who voted in the Republican primary that year. Based on the census and then the number of registered voters, that's between 8 and 10%, either 8% of the census, 8% of adults, or 10% of registered voters, however you want to do the math. That is 10% of South Carolinians who control 100% of South Carolina politics.
Yeah.
Right. And now this effort is, I guess they want to make sure it's down to 7%. Like, why are we trying to disenfranchise people and make it that a smaller and smaller and smaller slice of South Carolinians control what happens in Columbia? I don't understand it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that when you realize that a small percentage, which is your most radical neighbor, chose your legislator. And so that person, you didn't get to choose. Your vote didn't equal their vote because you didn't vote in the primary, and therefore you wound up getting, and then that person that won the primary ran in a gerrymandered district and guaranteed their win. And I think that where I believe this thing, yes, David Pascoe's article says that it's this whole thing about this bill and them pushing it so hard is because of him. I actually think it's because if you look at trending numbers for partisanship, more people are leaving both of the parties. And so there is a bigger chunk. I think the last number I read was like 27% Republican, 27% Democrat, and all the rest in the middle, 40-something%, were now saying they're independents. And that doesn't mean that they've suddenly become these centrist people. It means that they are pissed that the parties have been suppressing things that should be pulled out. So I think that this is, if you give a what about your vote and about the importance of your vote, this bill is only taking us down a road that.
Absolutely.
The other thing that's back are school vouchers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
I know.
The very original version of the school voucher was it limited how much a parent made.
That's right.
Of whether or not their child qualified for the voucher. And then the child got a $7,500 voucher to go to the school of their parents' choice.
Right.
And they had to be in a public school and switching to a private school or a different school that their parent felt would suit them better.
Right.
Okay.
Because remember, Grace, I mean, that was the whole point, right? That was what they were trying to say is, oh, we've got these students who are trapped in failing public schools, and we've got to give them an option. And so you're exactly right. It was tailored to what they claimed was the original point of the legislation at
That's
first.
right. And in that first iteration, I think that it was something like 80% of the kids that used those vouchers were actually coming from schools that some would consider not meeting their needs.
Yeah.
And they were moved into private schools. This last year iteration, it went from 80% of kids going from public schools to private schools because they changed it that you could now go from any school anywhere you want into any other school you want and get a $7,500 subsidy. It's now down to 28% of kids leaving public schools to kids going private to private.
That's right.
Or just staying in their private school and
just essentially using tax dollars to subsidize
private
what
schools.
Your family was doing anyway at private school. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's now a new iteration because we maxed out. There were only 10,000 families it was capped at 10,000 families. And now they're coming back to say, oh no, we need more. So essentially the light is on. We can see exactly what this is about. It's about moving all kids out of public schools and the state subsidizing private schools.
Yeah, absolutely. They had, I think, 16,000 applications. So now they're back. Shocker. It's like no one saw this coming. Now they're back saying, oh, we need another tens of millions of dollars to fund all every child who wants to do this. Now, the cynic in me, they keep saying that there's all this talk about, oh, well, it's not the same. These are dollars in the education line.
Yeah.
They directly are not going to public schools. They are directly shifting dollars from our public education system to the private schools, many of which are religious and not required to accept students with disabilities. And I mean, just go on.
And no oversight. No oversight.
None. Yeah. And so it's interesting. The only school in Charleston County that I could find that you could consistently attend with this scholarship was run by the Jehovah's Witness school, is my understanding. And I was sort of surprised that, I mean, again, everybody talks about, yes, we're going to allow this to go to religious schools, but I don't think people realize that means all of the religions. So,
yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting time to be doing all this because you're exactly right. It's almost like we stopped trying to hide the quiet part. Like we just do the thing.
Now they're just like, okay, we should pay for private school. And it's $7,500. So also, that's not what private schools cost. Private schools cost $20,000 and $30,000 and $40,000. And so the people that are benefiting from this are not the people that need good schools. They're people that already have good schools and can afford to go to good schools. And now they're just getting subsidized. And I think that is the point that should be made over and over and over again, is that we're supposed to be creating this to help someone who is in a situation that they can't get out of, that this is a stepping stone into something better for their child. In fact, that is not what this is at all. And so I think that we should all be really hyper-focused on this bill and really understanding what the goal is and letting people know that that's the case. Now abortion. Gah.
I know.
I mean, how many times do we have to do this? So there was a hearing last week and it passed out of the subcommittee that you are on, restricting mifepristone and misoprostol. So the bill's sponsor, State Representative Weston Newton, he's arguing that the bill does not ban the medication. And let's talk about what that medication is for. Because it's not just for people in early stages of pregnancy needing an abortion. It's also for people who have miscarried, who don't want to have or shouldn't need to have a DNC, which is a surgery.
Yeah. It's also the most common drug used to treat women who are having a postpartum hemorrhage. It's used to treat fibroids. It's used to treat there are tons and tons of uses for this medication.
Yeah.
But you're right. It is also used it is the most common method
for early stage
abortion.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, which is, I thought, what they're okay with, up to 6 weeks. We're okay with that. So now, though, they want to ban this medication, although Weston Newton says the bill does not ban the medication. I know you've read this bill through and through. Tell us what he means by that.
So he's correct. So there are a couple different things, a couple different angles here. So it would absolutely ban it from being used for an abortion, even legal abortion. We allow them up to 6 weeks. We allow them up to 12 weeks in the case of rape and incest, and even potentially longer in the case of the mother's health or a fetal anomaly. And so there are all these cases where we actually would normally allow it to be used for an abortion that now it cannot be used. Now, one of the things they keep touting about this is, it doesn't harm women. It doesn't criminalize a woman. Well, you don't mean the mom or the aunt or the grandmother who helped her do. Let's say, God forbid, it's a abusive situation and she goes to her mom for help. Well, now she's got to go into Planned Parenthood. I mean, they want to send everybody back to Planned Parenthood. I thought we were trying to get away from that.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it bans it for use for abortion. And then the second part of the bill would make mifepristone and misoprostol controlled substances in Schedule 4. And so what that does is it means now those medicines are locked up in a cabinet. A doctor can't, in an emergency situation, go get it off the cart. They have to write a prescription, make sure to code it correctly. The pharmacist has to receive that prescription, understand the code, understand that it's coded for non-abortion use, fill that prescription.
Yeah.
And then the woman brings it back to her doctor. So this is not a situation where it's as easy. We've added a huge layer in what can be a very time-sensitive use for this medication.
Which is what keeps happening. And I think that listening to that subcommittee hearing last week, I saw you right before the hearing. You were mad as a hornet, Spencer.
Yeah.
And a lot of people showed up. But one of the things that I just think we are missing in this whole thing is it doesn't matter who talks. It doesn't matter how many experts they hear from. It doesn't matter how many women they hear from who have had, I myself have had a postpartum hemorrhage and had to go get a DNC. Like, it doesn't matter to them. It just doesn't matter. Women's experiences and the actual medical establishment who knows what they're talking about on these situations, that deals with them every single day, all day long. Yeah. They don't care. Yeah. They don't care. Their belief in their religion over science has superseded all other things. And this is exactly why we have a separation of church and state. Yeah. This is why religion does not belong in every
the deal that the Republican Party made with the religious right. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's not even necessarily each and every legislators' beliefs. It is the deal they made to keep that section of voters in the Republican Party.
That's right. Yeah. And that goes back to gerrymandering.
Exactly. It all comes back to, and here we are back again.
We made it full circle. Okay, speaking of gerrymandering, so the next census isn't until 2030, which is 4 years away. You will be so far away from politics by then. I feel like you will have a martini. You will be smoking cigarettes probably.
And it's just going to be wild.
It's going to be amazing. We're going to be at happy hour every Friday. I can't wait. But that is when the redistricting happens, although it's starting now. Am I right about that? Have they started looking at what the districts will be and who will remain and who will not?
Maybe. there is and was a lot of political pressure to do what these other states were doing with these mid-cycle redistrictings.
Yeah.
I think the reason the leadership is resisting that is because they know how much
it would hurt them.
Yes, they had to gerrymander the hell out of the first congressional to get, or the hell out of the sixth congressional to get the first congressional to stay Republican. And I think they know what that sausage looks like inside the wrapper.
Yeah.
And the sixth congressional is the only way they have made every other district around it as Republican as it is. Because I mean, the statewide vote tallies end up being
not very different.
45-55, right? Not 2/3. And so they know. They know.
Yeah, if they undid Clyburn's district and moved people, I mean, it would make districts more competitive.
Yeah,
it'd have to work.
Silly. They could never. But to your original question about the 2030 census, yes, there's probably some jockeying now. Yes, what happens in these types of elections, particularly when they have a seat that they didn't think was going to be close, I don't know this to be the case, but if I were a betting woman, I would say that they're having some pretty serious conversations about District 98, which was Chris Murphy's district after that last election, where they're used to that being a 60-40 district, and now Democrats came within 27 votes, right? So I would say they're probably having those conversations. I'm not part of them. They probably wouldn't, even their favorite Democrat, they probably wouldn't bring in the room on those.
Yeah. And that's part of the problem, right? Is that there's not a Democrat talking to them at this stage, right? I'm sure there's some jockeying by Democrats as well as they get into that. But I also think that when you have a supermajority and they're the party that gets to choose the rules, you end up where we are with not that much of a difference between Republicans and Democrats, but a dominated legislature.
We would not even have to be having the conversation about closed primaries if they had, this whole boogeyman that they're worried about with the Freedom Caucus, the whole reason there's all this jockeying right now within the Republican Party over these closed primary bills is because they drew districts that make their sort of mainline candidates vulnerable. This is a self-inflicted wound, and now they're scrambling to try to backfill it. So limited sympathy, but I hope that they can see that going forward.
Yeah, but they're still not open to an independent redistricting commission. They just keep making that wound deeper.
I know.
Yeah. Okay, so there are a lot more pieces of legislation that we are probably not going to have time to get to today, but let's talk. So there's tax reform and budget. There's continuously a talk about undoing the $6 billion of income tax that we collect a year and how to do that. And there are a couple of different proposals. I'm sure that we will definitely have you back on to talk about that. There's a public safety bill that focuses on DUI laws and also definitions of domestic violence.
Yes, that's a big one. I mean, South Carolina is still 7th in the nation in terms of the worst state for domestic violence. And so those definitions matter big time.
Yeah. And then we have some infrastructure stuff happening. That's course, road ownership and maintenance. And the road ownership thing is pretty interesting to me because I think there are some other states that have done this where essentially they've taken state control of the roads and handed it back to the city, and then the city it maintains it and then you don't have to go through the bureaucratic stuff with the state.
Right. Yeah.
So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. Energy, there's a new continuing efforts for the 2025 Energy Security Act. And then there's some legislative process stuff, which is ensuring access to the calendar and managing bill introductions, some just sort of stuff that's how the sausage is made that none of us really ever pay attention to. But I think there's some reasons that we should pay attention to it.
I think you're right.
And then let's see, the budget. Always interested in the budget.
And listen, the budget might be the last good place in the state of South Carolina legislature, right? We actually do some good work in the budget. But the big question this year will be what we do with the surplus funds that we have, which include the money we didn't spend on earmarks last year. So the second big question will be, are we going to bring back this idea of earmarks or community investment dollars? To be honest with you, I've always had a personal policy about only using those for infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
And it's we had a $5 million investment last year in the traffic circle at the new elementary school on Johns Island.
Yeah.
Probably the single most important project I could imagine. And then we weren't able to complete the additional 1 million we needed because they just got rid of them. So I think that'll be, at least for a lot of us and for a lot of folks who just want investments in their communities, that's going to be the biggest question.
Yeah. And so let's talk about, so an earmark is when there is money from the legislature that goes directly to or is able to be determined for usage by the legislator that it goes to. So you as a House member would get, say, $5 million out of the budget, and you get to determine exactly how you use that money within your district.
Sort of. So the way it's worked since I've been there has been that we put in a request. And so, for example, I've only done local government work.
Yep.
And so I would have the local government entity send in the quote, the cost, the spec sheet, all of that.
Yep.
We would request it, and then the Ways and Means Committee goes through and decides which projects, right? So it's not always a set amount per legislator. Like the actual merit of the projects does factor into it.
Okay.
And so there is some back and forth. And to be honest with you, it's usually more like in past years, I was able to get like 1 million, right? So it's not, that 5 million was because all of us from Johns Island came together for that project.
Okay. And so I guess the question that I always have on that is the reason a lot of times they take those away is because they say, oh, people abuse them or people do X, Y, Z. But if it has to go in front of the Ways and Means Committee, there's already a check on it. So what's the reason that they would take that away from legislators?
There is always some allegation. In past years, sort of years ago, there was a lot more sort of, or maybe I should say a lot less transparency, right? There was a lot less. Now we have to have a cover sheet with the requesting agency and the amount and why and the costs. It wasn't always like that. So first off, there was opportunity for there to be problems with it for sure.
Yep.
But to be honest with you, whether or not it's an earmark or an agency request completely depends on the legislator making the request. If you don't think that there are people who control those committees that just have the agencies request the dollars rather than putting their own name on it, getting rid of earmarks only got rid of transparency because what it did was it shoved all those requests into the agency black hole instead of having a member's name on it and documentation attached. I mean, that might be a cynical explanation on my part. I won't defend every earmark that's ever gone out there.
Yeah.
But I certainly think there's a hell of a lot more transparency when we had the form and the uses and the cost specs than when you get rid of it and people will find a way.
Yeah. People will always find a way.
Yeah. So, but I think there's a million ways they can cut down on the problematic use of earmarks, right? They can require all the transparency. They can say it only goes to local governments, right? So that then there's someone doing accountability. They can establish a standard for nonprofits, like a gold star standard.
Right.
And then require them to do that. I mean, there's just a million ways they can rein it in, short of this idea that we're just going to cut them off altogether. So
we have to cut it here, but I have to say, I feel like this is your final season at the State House, which means untethered Spencer. We're going to get all the non-political savvy thoughts in your brain. I can't wait.
Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
It's going to be awesome.
I already gave my first legislative update was already pretty snarky. So.
I saw it. I loved it. I was like, here we go. Let's get us into this year.
Gloves
I can't
off
wait.
For sure. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, Spencer, thank you for being on the podcast. Always love to have you. And I know we're going to be talking to you a lot more this season.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
That's all this do for today. Thanks for listening.